Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. This week I'm talking to Julian Lallo about his work, NFTs and a range of other topics I hope you'll find interesting. When first picking up the camera in 2015, photography was for Julian nothing more than a hobby, an excuse to hang out with friends and take photos of their sneakers. But it very quickly progressed to something much more than that. It became an obsession which led Julian to experiment with all genres of the craft, from street photography and landscapes to portraiture and food. Gaining work with recognised brands in international tourism and as an ambassador for Canon Australia. As his interests have shifted, so too has Julian's main focus and passion in photography, a shift towards fashion photography, a direction that's off to a great start, having been involved in campaigns both locally and internationally with clients such as New Balance, Nana, Judy, Intimo, Seafolly and George and King. However, through the ever-evolving journey of his career as a photographer, one thing has remained the same. It still doesn't feel like work. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Julian. Welcome to the podcast. How are you going?
Good, thanks, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. I'm really happy to have you on the show. I've been following your work for a while and really pleased when you said yes to coming on the show. So tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into photography and, why photography.
So I'm a Melbourne-based photographer. I'm a full-time photographer now and work predominantly in fashion and food photography. But photography for me started kind of in a roundabout way. It actually started through collecting sneakers. So probably about 6-7 years back, I was big into sneaker collecting, and there was a bit of a scene on Instagram where people would take on-foot shots, so basically a selfie of your feet almost, to kind of flex your latest pair of sneakers. Yeah. And through that, I started with an iPhone, moved into a crop sensor DSLR, then moved into a full frame, and that kind of grew the passion for photography. And lucky in a way, because I stopped spending money on sneakers and started spending money on camera kit, and which is actually
which hobby's more expensive?
I'd say the sneakers is more addictive, so it probably becomes more expensive. The beauty of the photography is that you can earn a little money off it. So, that's kind of how it all started. And I was sort of chatting with a few photographers, and they sort of looked at these photos of my sneakers and they said, well, these are great, but there's more to life than shooting sneakers. So I went on a few photo walks in Melbourne and connected with a few people on Instagram, and then from that kind of got into street photography, started shooting some portraits, started shooting some landscapes, and it kind of was a bit of an evolution from there.
Cool. And so you've turned it into a full-time career?
Yeah. So I'd say that was sort of a process of about 3.5 years before I went full-time with it. 3.5, maybe 4 years. Started with that little bit of kind of people sending you bits and pieces, that little bit of contra work, and then it moved into some weekend gigs, and to the point where I went part-time with a job I was working in sales at the time, so I went part-time with my job in sales and part-time photography up until a couple of years ago, where I went full-time with it.
Okay, cool. And obviously the pandemic and everything's caused everybody a bit of strife. How's it actually been going in that last couple of years?
Yeah, this year's been great. And probably since November last year, it's been really great. I've kind of run off my feet at the moment, which is a really great thing and really positive. But yeah, the year leading up to that, especially being here in Melbourne, I think the most locked down city in the world, was it had some tough moments, but it was also probably a really good time. One, I started a YouTube channel in that time. Mm-hmm. Which I would never have had the time to do before that. So that's a photography-based YouTube channel, which has been great. And it also kind of made me really realize, leading into the pandemic, I was shooting everything from fashion to food, and what you probably know me for and what most of social media knows me for is my landscapes.
Yep.
And that pandemic time really made me realize what I miss and what I want to pursue and where I want to direct my photography going forward. So in terms of an income, it wasn't great for a year and a half, but it was good for, I think, my future in photography going forward.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what is it about, landscape photography, and, you're very well known for your foggy forest photography in particular. What is it about that really gets you going and gets you out into, conditions, when it's foggy and rainy and most people want to stay indoors, and you're out there in the forest trying to capture that atmosphere? What is it about it that makes you do that?
Well, I guess, like I said, I mean, most of my work isn't in landscape photography or travel photography. So it's the way for me to kind of, I guess, still harness that passion for photography and stay inspired. So, like I said, photography for me started as a hobby, but
Yep.
like a lot of hobbies, when people turn their hobby into a career, they lose a little bit of passion, a little bit of spark,
Sure.
and then
becomes work. And
it becomes work. And what's the hobby? So for me, shooting those moody landscapes is where I keep that creativity going, and where photography is still a hobby and it's not work.
Yeah.
As much as I say that, I love the work that I do, shooting fashion in particular. Still doesn't feel like work, but yeah, that's just sort of how I keep that creative alive. And it also allows me to, I'm between work and a young family. I don't have a lot of spare time. So it's also the time where I get to catch up with mates.
Yeah.
And just hang out and shoot. And whether I come home with one or two great shots or I don't, I've got up, I've got outdoors, I've achieved something. By 9 a.m, I've achieved something for the day, and I've got to hang out with a few buddies.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So you talked a little bit about, it being a hobby and then turning it into a career. So what was it that, how did you go through that decision-making process of deciding to make it a full-time career?
Yeah, it was a pretty tough one, but made easier by getting an in-house photography position for the first little while of that transition. Mm-hmm. Like anything, going into a freelance creative career, it's a pretty big step when you've gone from years of, 15, 16 years of a career, going freelance into a creative career is a pretty big decision. So the transition was made a little bit easier by going into a 3-day-a-week in-house role, and that helped that transition. But I found that because, like I said, photography isn't really, when it is work, it doesn't really feel like work. If you're doing the jobs that you enjoy, that kind of made me really want to push to do that, so that I could move into something that didn't feel like work.
Yeah. And in terms of the work that you are doing, in the food and fashion industry, I guess, are you able to pick and choose what you want to do, or are you just still in that phase of just give me anything, bring it on, I'll do anything?
No, I'm at I definitely went through that phase, but I feel very fortunate now to be in a position where I can be a little bit choosy.
Yep.
And I'm also, so I'm choosing the jobs that I take, and I'm also choosing to start take on less and less food and shoot just more fashion.
Yeah, fair enough. So I guess, how far do you travel for your photography, and what's the furthest you've gone to get a shot?
I guess, well, keeping it within Australia, I guess probably about 3 hours either side of Melbourne are some really great landscape photography locations.
Yep.
Obviously, most people are aware of the Great Ocean Road and the 12 Apostles.
Sure.
And then if you go in the other direction, you've got Wilson's. So you got Wilson's Prom, and then the Grampian. So these destinations are all around that 3.5 hour sort of drive from Melbourne.
Yep.
So those, when you're shooting a sunrise or sunset, it's either a really early start or late night by the time you get home for those drives. And
Sure.
And then obviously I've been lucky enough to travel to a few countries around the world and to get a few shots that I've, that few of those bucket list shots.
Yeah, no, great. So are there any particular go-tos that you're always sort of drawn to? And, Yeah, obviously I'm not asking for your secret spots, but
Most of them are pretty well known by now. But
yeah. But
um,
I guess are there any ones that you're particularly drawn to, and why you're drawn to them? What is it about those locations that makes you keep coming back?
yeah, I mean the one that I'm probably makes up half of my Instagram feed would probably be the Black Spur,
Yeah.
and that one's probably about 50 minutes to an hour from Melbourne, and it's it's one of those spots that's beautiful regardless of the conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Saying that, I hate shooting it with sunlight. I hate shooting most things with half sunlight, but I really enjoy the drive through there. It's this beautiful winding road, really tall gums, I'm not going to try and tell you what type of trees they are because I'll get it wrong, and
Some kind of eucalypt.
yeah, someone that knows trees better than me will correct me. But the Black Spur is probably one of my favorite spots. This beautiful long drive, and when you get fog in the right spots through that drive, it's just a magic drive to start with, and then always great for taking photos. The trees are super tall, and if you get really put a sense of scale into things. So the Black Spur, it's nice and close to home, and in the right conditions, it's beautiful. And when it's not the right conditions for photography, it's a beautiful drive all the same.
No, fair enough. So, are there any particular things that you're doing, I guess, that might be different to others, and what is it about that makes you do them, and why do you do them?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure if there's any things that I'm doing any different. That's a good one. You've stumped me there a bit, Grant, but
That's okay.
yeah, I guess because it's just a hobby in terms of the landscape stuff. I try not to take any of it too seriously. I try not to go with any expectations or a shot in mind, and just sort of get out there and shoot what I'm feeling on the day.
Yeah, fair
I
enough.
am not the greatest of editors, in my opinion. So I think I shoot the way you see my images is pretty close to how I shoot them. That's probably a little bit different. I leave them pretty natural, and try and give a real sense of kind of the conditions on the day. If anything, I'd say that's where, and that's probably, maybe if I knew all the Lightroom and Photoshop tricks of the trade, maybe that'd be a different story. But I guess that's probably maybe where I'm a little bit different, is the kind of the natural editing style that I use with my images. But in terms of the way I shoot, I'm not a technical photographer by any means. I actually took my cameras into Canon the other day, and they said you're about 5 updates behind on each of your camera bodies. So the tech doesn't impress me. So I'm not super technical when I shoot either. I think I just keep it simple, and that's probably keep it simple and enjoy it, and that's my point of difference.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Fair enough. So I guess when you're out there in the field, are you looking to create something distinctive and recognizable in the landscape genre, or are you looking for that one of a kind shot? Or do they just come along as they come when you get the opportunity?
Yeah, I think with landscape photography, because the conditions are something completely out of your control, which is completely the opposite to fashion photography, where I can control most things.
Yep.
I think you kind of go there and work with what you're given. So I don't really go with any intention. Obviously, I go with some conditions that I would love to capture, but that doesn't always happen. So no real intention other than the location I'd like to shoot, and kind of show off what I'm seeing on the day when I'm there.
Yeah, sure.
And if I can keep it, sorry.
No, go on.
In finishing your question, if I can keep it recognizable to my style, I think that's probably something most photographers really aim for, is that someone can see an image without a name attached to it and say, that's a Julian Lallo, or that's,
Yep.
I think that's sort of the ideal.
Yeah. Have you reached that ideal, do you think, or are you still working towards it?
Yeah, I think, there's been times where I think my work's kind of ever evolving, and trying to sort of mix it up a little bit at the moment. But I think there was definitely a time when I was shooting landscapes heavily, and I had a lot of time to get out and shoot landscapes. I think I had reached that point where people were recognizing my work without seeing it.
Yep.
Now I've probably, just with my interest shift and into sort of more fashion photography, I'm working towards it in that genre, I think, a little more.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'd like to explore that difference you mentioned between, the studio photography versus, landscape. I guess they're two very different conditions, particularly around lighting, where you can, as you said, virtually control everything in the studio environment. What is it that you like and dislike about the two? What are the what are the things that make you arc up, and what are the things that you go, oh, that's just fantastic because I can either control it or I can't control it, and it just happens,
Yeah, I think being able to control, I guess we're talking about light,
yep.
Which is what most of photography revolves around. And I think when you're able to control something, I think there's a little bit more pressure to get it right, because it is in your control.
Yeah.
So that kind of challenge, and I shoot a lot more probably on location than I do in studio when it comes to fashion. But again, you can, by manipulating the location you're shooting in, by using reflectors and other sorts of things, you can still control the light. And I think when you're shooting, particularly one for a client and two where you can control a lot of these variables, there's a lot more pressure to get it right. And that, although it's kind of nerve-wracking, particularly leading into it, and sometimes can be stressful when you're there in location, I kind of like that challenge, and I get more gratification out of that end result if I nail it. Whereas on the flip side, if you can't control a sunset, you can't control where those clouds are, you work with it to the best of your ability, and some people are better at it than others. But at the end of the day, it kind of is what it is.
Yeah,
that's what you've got to work with. That's the sunrise you're working with on that day. That's the sunset you're working with on that day. So it may be disappointing rather than kind of, how did I describe the other way? Rather than sort of, it's kind of disappointing if it doesn't come out, if it's not the sunset that you were chasing, as opposed to that kind of like nervous feeling of being able to control it but not getting it right.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. So when you do get that sunrise or sunset that you have been chasing, is that a feeling equivalent to nailing it in the studio or on location where you can control the light, or is it different again?
Yeah, being in the moment is equivalent.
Yeah.
So I love being there when that sunrise, like the level of excitement when I'm out shooting a landscape and I get the fog that I want, or I get the sun, the sunrise, the sun rays, whatever it might be.
The light just does something and you go, yeah, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah. And again, I think because there's no pressure behind it, I've taught myself to stop a little bit and enjoy it without the viewfinder as well. So the level of excitement when I get those conditions, it is matched. And it's a beautiful thing. In terms of the shot itself, in terms of the outcome, the end result, I think the level of excitement of a good fashion image kind of trumps landscape image for me personally.
Yeah, okay.
But in the moment, they're on par.
Yeah, cool. So you mentioned, the people have started to sort of recognise your style. How, for people that haven't seen your work, how would you describe it? How would you describe your style? What makes a Julian Lallo?
Yeah, in terms of my landscapes, I think, like I mentioned, they're pretty they're not over edited. I wouldn't suggest. They're pretty. What you see is pretty much what I saw on the morning. I wouldn't suggest. Definitely, they're not over edited. My greens are pretty. I find greens, like a lot of people. I saw a Twitter poll the other day, and it was something about what is the hardest color for you to edit, or what do you find hard to nail in post-production? And probably, I think it was sort of around the 90% of people responded with greens. followed by yellows and then blues. And I find greens really difficult as well. So for that fact, I tend to leave them as natural as possible. And so I think my style may be more recognizable because of the types of locations, the types of conditions that I shoot, more so than like a really distinctive editing style or shooting style. I do like to capture scale. That's one thing that I like to capture with my images. So yeah, probably the conditions and the type of shot that I chase is where my style is recognizable. Yeah.
So I guess one of the things in terms of developing style and those sorts of things, are there any particular influences that have made you both shoot and also process the way that you do?
Yeah, so I guess I'm trying to think back to early days of Instagram, who I used to really. It's funny, not a lot of the first people that I really, really loved their work, that kind of inspired me to shoot more, were more in street photography than they were in than actual landscapes. I think landscapes I kind of fell into because living in Melbourne, you got far more options to shoot landscapes than really great street photography.
There's some street photographers down there who would argue with that.
Oh, there are some great ones. And that's how you know that they're great, because, I think I was in Tokyo a couple of years back, and just this morning I was looking at a few of the street photos that I took on my film camera in Tokyo, and I'm like, wow, this is just a point and shoot film, and these photos are like incredible. And I'm like, I don't know any laneway in Melbourne that I could point my film camera at and have an image just come out like this, like a point and shoot camera, and an image end up like this. So they're a great street photographer when they're making Melbourne look as good. I mean, we live in a beautiful city, but in terms of street photography, they definitely nail it. So I think that's how I kind of started to shoot. I've completely rambled and lost the question.
No, that's fine. The question was, are there any influences that have
influences? Yep.
Guided your style?
Yeah, so I always a couple of Aussie photographers that I've always really admired from the get-go. A Sydney-based photographer, Ben, who's Ichban, goes by Ichban on Instagram. Jared Seng from WA. I've always really admired his work and have been lucky enough to work with him on a few projects through Canon. Stephen Venasco was a really big influence on getting me to shoot. He's an LA-based photographer, shoots a lot of aerial, shoots a lot of film, street photography, shoots a bit of everything. And he was probably, following him made me want to just get out and shoot. And then those other couple that I mentioned. And there's been many more along the way. I'm really terrible with names. So,
that's fine.
So I can picture a heap of people that I follow on social media that I'm like, yeah, I really love their work, or really love their style, or they're kind of their way of capturing minimalistic scenes, or their way of capturing scale has really inspired me. But names don't always come to me.
So in terms of I guess developing the style and working through that process of learning how to shoot and learning how to process, are you self-taught, or have you reached out for education resources elsewhere, or other than the usual YouTube, which I think to be honest, one of the best resources that has ever existed in terms of being able to learn to do something?
Well, self-taught in terms of I never went to school or have done any courses to learn, but when I started out, I just made it my mission to shoot with as many different people from as many different genres as possible. Shot with street photographers, landscape photographers, portrait photographers, and everybody teaches you a little something else, regardless of genre at all. And like I mentioned before, photography is so much about light. So every little thing from every genre that you can learn about light, I think helps you as a photographer. And so I can thank so many people for where I'm at today in terms of the skills that I've learned along the way.
Yeah. Is there anyone in particular that you go to for advice, or do you just freewheel it?
In the beginning, there was a photographer who helped me out quite a lot in the beginning. Used to lend me gear and used to sort of give me a lot of advice. These days, not so much. These days, it is YouTube. YouTube is where I go to for some advice. And now I just really, I study images a lot differently. I study the light in images a lot differently, and that's how how I teach myself.
Yeah.
I'm trying to ever sort of evolve my craft is just by studying other people's images that I really admire.
Yeah. So in terms of deciding to go out and shoot, you sort of look at the conditions and do a lot of planning up front, or do you just sort of wake up on the day and go where it feels best?
Generally, I have a rough look at the weather forecast and what the clouds are doing. Again, like with my camera gear, I'm not super technical with weather either. I've got some mates that I if I'm shooting with them, I leave it to them and I trust their judgment because they can read weather charts way better than me.
Fair enough.
I just sort of look at, generally if I'm going to the Black Spur, I'll look at temperature, wind speed and humidity.
Yep.
They're pretty much the three variables that I look at for fog. Yeah. And in terms of sunrises and sunsets, I've got mates that know that in summer at the sunset in this spot at this time and shooting from this direction and that composition is best. I'm not great with all that sort of stuff. So
you're not I can pick. Not poring over photo pills or one of the other apps to.
I don't even have any of them. No, I kind of, like I said, I use it as a chance to catch up with mates. So I make sure I shoot with one of my mates that's all clued up with that sort of stuff. Yeah.
No, fair enough. That's good. So what about when you get on site? What is your shooting process? What are you looking for in a location, and what are the things that you're sort of got in the back of your mind when you sort of step out of the car or wherever you are and decide, okay, this is where I'm going to plant the tripod, or this is where I'm going to stand. What are the things you're looking for?
Yeah, well, it's definitely more stand. Often I don't bring a tripod with me. I like sort of shooting most things handheld. I don't shoot a lot of long exposures. Okay. I did when I was starting out, but not so much anymore. Yeah. I guess I look for light and scale, I guess, would be the two things that I look for. I think for me, trying to give that sense of scale to the landscapes that I shoot, and then the way the light's hitting them. So if I can find a composition where I get some beautiful light and show off a nice sense of scale, I think they're my go-tos. And obviously, throwing a figure in a getting someone to stand in to accentuate that sense of scale is always a bonus.
The dreaded yellow or red jacket.
Oh yeah, the Instagram favorite. Yeah.
Or someone with a hat.
Yeah. Lucky gone are the days of the fairy lights. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I guess particularly around your local area, what are the key things in that area that are attracting you? Obviously the forests, but aside from that, you mentioned Wilson's Prom. If you're headed down that way, are you into the forests again, or are you looking for coastal seascapes or cliffs? Or
we're really lucky to have really beautiful some really beautiful coastline around. So definitely seascapes. In most, other than sort of the Grampians, there's some really beautiful seascapes in all directions, all those other locations I mentioned earlier.
Great Ocean Road, of course.
Great Ocean Road. And then
they're hiding under a rock.
Yeah. And then Mornington Peninsula, that's only sort of an hour and a bit from Melbourne. So really beautiful coastline down there. I fly a drone as well. So that also, beautiful, getting some beautiful perspectives from the drone of shooting some seascapes. Sorry.
So when you're using the drone, what percentage of your work would you say would be drone based versus either handheld or just the camera as opposed to a drone camera?
Yeah, I think that might largely depend on the conditions of the day.
Mm-hmm.
If the conditions aren't like I said, if it's not the sunrise or the sunset that I was chasing, I probably tend to gravitate to the drone a little bit more, because I think you can find a different perspective that can still be interesting without sort of accentuating the sunrise sunset. So on days like that, I'd probably go to the drone a little bit more so that I come away with a few images. If not, I am definitely more. I think there's more of a challenge to shooting with the camera, shooting handheld, than there is to a drone, because obviously you've got far fewer perspectives or compositions that you can capture depending on where you're shooting. So when the opportunity is there, I'd rather shoot handheld with the camera, most definitely.
Sure. I guess in talking to you, I get a sense that you're obviously quite keen on the environment. I guess, how important is it to you in showing that environment off to people and getting them aware of environmental concerns and issues?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, and something that I've always been one to I've always done a lot of outdoor activities. So I've always ridden mountain bikes and I surf. So I've always had an appreciation for getting outdoors, and I've always been in and around these beautiful sort of landscapes. But it wasn't until I started photography and sharing it on social media that I realized how many people don't know what's at their back door. And people think that, the Black Spur, like I said, is 45, 50 minutes from Melbourne, one of the most sort of beautiful areas you can ever lay your eyes on. And how many Melburnians don't know it exists?
Yeah,
and it wasn't until yeah, exactly right. And even down the coast, like, people thought, oh, like, what country is this in? I've been asked by people in Melbourne, like, where did you travel to get this photo? I'm like, oh, I jumped in the car on Saturday morning and I drove down the road. Yeah. And so I think it's become a really big part of why I shoot and share as well. And I think social media in that respect has done some really great things for the environment, because it has got people out into these landscape situations more and more, open their eyes to what's at their back door, and in their own country, particularly in their own state, in their own city. And I think the more people get out in these environments and landscapes, the more they start to then respect them themselves. So yeah, it's a really important factor, and something that I never thought would be so rewarding from taking these photos and sharing them. But yeah, it really is.
Yeah. What's the most memorable experience you've had whilst out shooting?
Oh, wow. I think there's many of them, but one which is kind of a comical one and is probably the most memorable. I'm trying to think. I've completely lost track of what year was what. Since this last sort of year and a half, I've kind of blurred all the years together a little bit. But I think it was maybe about 3-4 years ago. I was in Italy with my wife, and we went to Lago de Braise, which a lot of people would know. It was kind of the Instagram hotspot of probably 3-4 years ago, in the Alps in Italy. And this beautiful lake where you've got a cliff face, sometimes snow-capped at the end of it, still day, reflection, little boathouse. And we were staying in a place called Cortina d'Ampezzo, which is probably about an hour away. Got up for sunrise. My wife doesn't like waking up for sunrise. Convinced her to wake up for sunrise. We drove there. I was so in awe of this place that I just completely pretty much forgot how to use a camera. I could not make a composition to save myself. And I was just stunned by the location, and I came away with no photos that I liked. Completely. Wow. I was shattered, and I was shattered, but still, on top of the world, but shattered that I had no photos. So we went back I got her to wake up again, and we went back the next morning, and I was completely camera focused. But that's probably one of the most memorable places that I've that I've shot, and all through that region in Italy is just absolutely stunning. I would love to get back there I'd get back there in a heartbeat and shoot it all again.
I guess talking about overseas travel in particular, has the pandemic changed your attitude towards travel and travel photography in particular, or is it just still too raw and too early, and you haven't been able to get out of Australia to get anywhere?
Yeah, it came at a really bad. I think leading up to the pandemic, I had 3 international jobs within a 2-month period. So I was doing quite a bit of international travel and had got a few tourism campaigns and one fashion campaign all overseas. And so that kind of, unfortunately, the pandemic put a stop to that, and I had a few booked. But so I am hanging to start traveling again with a young family. I'm happy enough though to stay in Australia at the moment and make sure that we all stay safe. But it's also just, I mean, I'd never been to far north Queensland before. While my wife was pregnant with our first couple of years ago, we went up to far north Queensland. I went to Fitzroy Island. We went through Cairns and Daintree. It's so bloody beautiful. And, I think that our first trip, regardless of when the borders open up and how safe it's going to be, I still think our first trip is going to be in Australia. There's so much beauty at our back door, and it's hard sometimes because it is cheaper for us in Australia to travel overseas sometimes, and for a week or 2 weeks away. But I think I'm fine. As much as I'd love to get overseas and shoot a few different cities and around the world, I'm fine hanging out in Australia for a while. And hopefully, I've never been to WA. Oh, I've been to WA once, but it was a work trip and didn't see much of it. And I know there's some beautiful coastline and over there that I'm yet to shoot. So I'm fine hanging out in Australia for a while, and all going well, getting to see a bit more of it.
Fair enough. Do you have any horror stories, I guess, from your photo career, either your professional career or the relaxation side of it?
Horror stories. I'm sure there are plenty of horror stories, but maybe I've buried them deep down in my brain that I can't think of any. I can think of one that's probably a bit of a boring one. That's I did a headshot shoot at university here in Melbourne, and it kind of it went wrong for so many reasons, and it's why I don't shoot headshots anymore, and why I'm so happy that I can be a little bit more picky with the work I can take on. But that's a horror story that's a bit of a boring one, so I won't get into that. But
seems traumatized you though.
yeah, it did, Grant. It did. It did.
All right, moving on. Have you ever hit a creative wall, and if so, how did you handle it?
Yeah, often. But especially through this last 2 years, through the pandemic, where I wasn't really picking up my camera at all. It was really hard to get back into shooting anything creative after that. It was hard to stay creative through the pandemic, which is why I started the YouTube channel, but then even that started getting difficult. How did I get out of it? I went to my favorite place. Like I mentioned, this is the reason I go there, the Black Spur. And I went there with my camera with the intention to take some photos, and I didn't take any photos that day. I just hung out in the Black Spur and enjoyed it. And I think my takeaway from that is to stop, that I need to, when I get that creative block, I get too much in my own head. So I kind of need to stop and just forget about it and not try to get out of my creative block. Just relax and not force it, and it kind of comes back.
So one of the things that I've seen from you on Twitter is you've started to get into NFTs. What is it that sort of drew you into that, and how did you get started with that?
I guess, if I'm being honest, the reason I got started and what drew me into it was was the ETH, was the Ethereum,
The money.
which I think is, yeah, I mean, I think most people would be telling a lie if they said they didn't initially get into it for the thought that they can stack a bit of ETH or earn a bit of money from it. And that's why I got in and minted my first image on Foundation, and a friend of mine, Tom Kwan, gave me the invite, and he had sold a few pieces, and I saw a few other friends sell some work, and that's probably what it initially got me into it. That was probably about 6 or 7 months ago. That particular piece is still sitting there on Foundation, but I'm still in it, and I'm still in love with NFTs every day, and buying. I've sold some other work. I've bought a lot of other photographers' work, and like I said in the beginning, I'm like, oh, I'm going to sell pieces, but there's no way I'm going to invest any. Like, that's crazy. Like, it was kind of, but that's just being honest. And now I've collected from like 25 different photographers. And so I think what that being in the community, and when I got into it, there was this whole thing about you've got to be in the community to sell work. And I was like, community, like I didn't get it. And then
coming from Instagram, where it's sort of dog eat dog, and
it is, yeah. And then you get into you spend some time on Twitter, and then you hang out in Twitter Spaces, which, for those that aren't familiar with Twitter Spaces, it's kind of like a I guess it's a space where you can talk. It's an audio space where you can get in and talk, and there's 12 people on stage, and that can talk to each other, and then people listening in an audience that can request to get up and speak. So you're having real life conversations with people, and you start building friendships and relationships, and that's when the mindset starts to change from, hey, I can sell an NFT and I can earn some money, and not reinvest it, to, oh, wow, I really want to support that person and I really want to buy their piece, so I really hope I sell something soon so that I can reinvest it in someone else. And so that's kind of, if I'm being honest, the journey of my journey in NFTs, it was to list a piece and hopefully sell it, and then be done with it and list another one. But it's kind of turned into something that I just really love. I love hanging out on Twitter and in that community that that kind of all have similar passions. And what else I've really enjoyed about it is, on Instagram, I follow landscape photographers that shoot similar to me, and I follow fashion photographers. And whereas my eyes have been open to so mmany other genres of photography, like storm chasing, I didn't know it was a thing. Like, I knew people chase storms, but I never knew people photographed these storms. And then, I've always been obsessed with underwater photography, but now there's, I can actually chat with these underwater photographers and listen to them speak. And street photo, it's sort of re-inspired me to shoot some street photography. And it's, in terms of kind of creative blocks, Twitter and the NFT community is a really sort of inspirational place for those creative blocks, because you look at things, by looking at something else and taking your mind off your creative block or your genre or focus, I think it really inspires.
Yeah. So where do you see it, I guess, in the, obviously, and I don't know, you obviously have the more commercial side of your work, which is you selling your talent as a photographer, as opposed to selling individual creative pieces. Do you sell your creative pieces as prints in physical media, or do you tend not to do that? And where do you see, I guess, NFTs in that spectrum of you're marketing your brand and your type of photography?
Yeah. So in terms of the physical prints, that was the first job for me that I gave myself during the pandemic, was to set up a print store so that I had another form of passive income, depending on how long this pandemic was going to go for and these lockdowns. And I got pretty much to the end point of setting up my print store when I discovered the NFTs. And that kind of put a stop to the print store. Not because I don't want to sell prints anymore, because I just got too fixated on NFTs. I also saw the value in selling my work as an NFT over selling a print. How many prints I would need to sell to earn the same sort of value as selling an NFT is crazy if you do the math. So that kind of put a little bit of a stop. I just kind of weighed up the time investment. So no, I don't. I mean, if somebody reaches out to me, I'll do prints, one of ones. But no, I don't have a print store. And in terms of how I see myself marketing my work through NFTs, I'm kind of at this little bit of a crossroad at the moment, because I got known on sort of Instagram is really good at pigeonholing you, because if you don't post the work that people know you for, you don't get engagement. And if you don't get engagement, then it plays with your mind and you don't want to post that work again. So Instagram pigeonholed me as this landscape photographer that shoots foggy green scenes, which is great. But I've moved on a little bit. Yeah, I've moved on a little bit as a person, and I shoot a lot more fashion, and I want to get more creative with my portraiture and fashion photography. And my original collection that I dropped on OpenSea was called The Crossing, and it was shot in the Shibuya Crossing in Tokyo. Yep. And it was kind of, I guess, a street, I guess you'd call it a street photography collection. Not a traditional street photography. It was kind of from up a high perspective, and it was just colorful taxis, different colored taxis going across the crossing. And that was great. And that sold out. And I thought, what was next? And I wasn't really getting out and shooting because it was still mid-pandemic. So I thought, well, this is what has kind of made my name in terms of Instagram and social media, is these moody greens. I'm going to make a collection around these greens.
Yeah.
And in sharing all that, I've now found myself getting pigeonholed again into the landscape photographer on Twitter and in NFTs. So I'm at kind of a little bit of a crossroads, and I really want to do something completely different going forward with NFTs. So I'm at that little bit of a crossroad in terms of how to actually do that. Because I've noticed when I do, again, on Twitter, post something different, the engagement is different as well. So, and it's interesting. When I started Twitter, I said to myself, I'm going to just share all my work. This is really refreshing. I'm going to share everything.
Yep.
And again, I can feel that kind of, I can feel that changing, and I can feel myself slipping back into the ways of Instagram. So it's sort of something that I'm working on at the moment in terms of how to rebrand myself to the creative that I am today, rather than the creative that got me here.
Yeah, got it. I guess it's a bit like some musicians where the fans are clamoring for the old stuff, but you've got all this new material that you want to get out into the world, and people kind of going, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, 100%.
Hit me with the hits from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess where do you stand in terms of, I mean, obviously you've made the plunge, but what's your feeling in terms of, there's a lot of controversy in particular around the environmental impact, particularly with the Ethereum blockchain and that sort of thing. I've seen reports which say that it's one Ethereum transaction takes about a household's monthly electricity to process. Now whether or not that's entirely true or not, I'm not 100% sure, but with those sorts of reports around, where do you stand, I guess, in terms of that environmental impact that might be there from some of these things?
Yeah, well, I'm aware that there's an environmental impact, and I hadn't heard any figures like that. So that's really quite alarming. And at the same time, I'd be hypocritical, like investing in crypto and minting NFTs, buying and selling NFTs. I'd be hypocritical if I said that I'm all about, I'm completely against it and the environmental impact. I guess my hopes rest in the devs and ETH 2.0, and I know that they are building more sustainable crypto mining facilities. I guess my hopes are in the fact that all sort of develops sooner rather than later. At this rate, I guess it's not building a sustainable future.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things that I'm kind of torn. I'm full disclosure, I've invested a little bit in ETH, and bought some NFTs and also, sold a couple. But I'm kind of at that point where I'm going, okay, well, I'm not entirely sure where I go with it, personally. I haven't said this, very publicly, but I'm just about to, I guess, now. But for me, I'm definitely torn about where it currently stands, and it's one of the things that I'm really interested in exploring, and using the podcast in particular to do that. And I've got a couple of other people lined up that I'm really keen to talk to about their views, both for and against, because I like to do a bit of research on both sides. I think for me it's really about whether or not there's and it's always difficult, is there accurate reporting. But then you look at photographers, landscape photographers that are happy to fly to remote locations, etc., and there's the carbon footprint of everything that they're doing as well. And I don't know where the right lay of the land actually is, but I think it's an important thing for people to discuss and have a think about. And I'm not trying to dissuade you or sway you either way in this. It's I'm relatively neutral about it myself. But it is something that I just like to explore with people and understand their views and where they stand on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that probably needs to be brought to the forefront of a lot of people's attention. I'm probably not well versed enough about it to make full judgments, but from what I have heard, I do hope that this solar powered mining and sustainable mining does become more forefront.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess what tips have you got for somebody that would just be starting out in landscape photography?
My tips for landscape photography are probably the same as for any genre of photography, and that would be to shoot as much as you can. Shoot with as many different people as you can shoot with, because they are your best teachers, particularly people that are more experienced than you, and to shoot in all conditions. And also shoot, when you're starting out, shoot every genre. Shoot portraits, shoot landscapes, shoot street photography, learn lighting, because photography is all about lighting. I think that's the third reference to it in this, since we've been chatting. Photography is all about light. So if you can learn a little bit of something about photography and light from every genre, it's only going to make you a better photographer at whatever photography you choose to do. So that'd be my key tips.
All right. So what do you like to do when you're not shooting? Where, obviously it's work, but it's also a hobby. So, what do you do when you're not got a camera?
These days, I have a nearly 3-year-old son and a nearly 1-year-old daughter. So these days when I'm not shooting, I am...
it's a handful.
Yeah, they are keeping me very busy. I would like to say I still... I bodyboard, but I would like to say I still surf a bit, but I don't. That is what I would probably like to be doing a little bit more of when I'm not shooting. Yeah. So at the moment it's family, shooting predominantly for work, not so much for pleasure, hobby at the moment. But and NFTs take up a hell of a lot of time, as you probably know.
Yeah, definitely. What's the best thing about being a photographer?
I meet lots of people, particularly shooting fashion, hang out with lots of different interesting people, and for me it's the flexibility of it, especially with a young family. The flexibility that being a full-time freelancer gives me is fantastic. Yeah.
What's the worst thing?
The stack of hard drives that I'm looking at right now that I don't know where to keep, or the worst thing. What is the worst thing? I love shooting more than I love editing. So photography specific, for me, it's probably editing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's probably it.
So, are there any photographers out there that you think I should be talking to on the podcast? Any names you'd like to drop that I should get in touch with?
Yeah. So, just trying to think. Lately, there's a photographer that I really recently discovered on Twitter, who's not in the landscape genre, but he's a photographer that has really inspired me of late. His name is, I'm going to probably stuff up his surname, but it's Grayson Luffenberger, and he's a black and white portrait photographer, very conceptual. He's he's inspired me a lot. I really love his work, and I've only recently come across him. In terms of landscape photographers, another photographer that I've only really recently come across, she's a Kiwi. She's New Zealand-based landscape photographer, Alan Cayford.
Mm-hmm.
Cayford. Really beautiful landscapes. Just love her. Really beautiful, fresh, crisp editing style. And I don't know much about her, so I'd love you to have a chat with her so I can learn a little more. And yep,
I'll put her on the list.
Excellent.
All right. I've got one last and probably the most important question of right. the podcast.
I'm nervous now. Hit me.
Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Oh, mate, I could make a podcast in itself about this topic. Pizza is very close to my heart, but for the essence of time, I'm going to just say no.
No, that's a very Italian answer.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, no.
I was a chef before I got into sales and then photography, and I made pizza for many years and worked in Rome also for quite a while in a pizzeria. So very close to my heart.
Yeah, fair enough. I knew you'd have a strong opinion on it.
Like I said, that's a podcast for another day.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time out to talk to me today, Julian. I've really enjoyed catching up with you, and it's fantastic to hear about how you do your thing. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Thanks for having me. I guess I'm on Instagram and predominantly probably a little bit more Twitter these days at Julian Lallo. That's all my kind of travel landscape photography. Julian Lallo Photography on Instagram is my fashion work, and I'm also on YouTube under the same name. So,
very good. All right. Well, thanks again.
No, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.